Washington's key allies have once again underlined that they're not joining a wider war, at least for now. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says Britain will not take part in offensive strikes, and that the UK is only taking defensive action and supporting allies. And while France is also holding back, President Emmanuel Macron warned against escalation, saying countries must respect each other's borders. Germany's urging caution as well. Chancellor Merz says he's raised concerns with Donald Trump, and there is now a delay in possible strikes. So the message from allies is clear: they're not willing to be rushed into a conflict. Meanwhile, Russia is also warning of serious risks. Kremlin spokesperson Peskov says any strike on nuclear sites would be extremely dangerous and would have irreversible consequences. For any UK action, there must be a lawful basis and a viable and thought-through plan. That is why we didn't join the original offensive strikes. It is why we did take defensive action, collective, self-defensive action on our own behalf when it comes to the work that we're doing with our allies in the region, taking missiles out that are coming from Iran. It's also why we allowed our bases to be used for the purposes of collective self-defense. But that's an important divide. So collective self-defense, yes, and we've taken appropriate action, but this is not our war, and we are not getting dragged into this war. The fight of Lebanon today is just. It is to fight against all those who threaten its security or that of its neighbors, and no one here justifies the attacks and terrorist movements. But the message is that Lebanon alone must manage its problems and that nothing can justify actions that violate its territorial integrity, its sovereignty. No occupation, no form of colonization, neither here nor in the West Bank nor elsewhere, would ensure the security of anyone. At a time when some would like to push us into an escalation of wars, at a time when some others would like to make us believe that security can only be ensured by the invasion of the neighbor who frightens us, Lebanon reminds us of one thing: the strength of universalism and the fact that nothing should prevail over this message and the strength, as you've recalled, that international law carries, which is the possibility to live in peace. Iran has to cease immediately its threats, laying of mines, drones, and missile attacks and other attempts to block the strait to commercial shipping. The recent attacks by Iran on unarmed commercial vessels in the Gulf, attacks on civilian infrastructure, including oil and gas installations, and the de facto closure of the Strait of Hormuz by Iranian forces is unacceptable and must be condemned. I also want to emphasize that freedom of navigation is a fundamental principle of international law. I do this in relatively regular intervals. We also discussed the situation in the Middle East. I expressed my concerns to him regarding the announced attacks on power plants in Iran. I'm grateful that he said today that he would postpone this by 5 days and now also opens the possibility for immediate and direct contacts with the Iranian leadership. I offered him our assistance in every way. We have good contacts throughout the entire region. We believe that the situation should have transitioned to a political and diplomatic settlement as early as yesterday. This is the only thing that can effectively contribute to de-escalating the catastrophically tense situation that has developed in the region now. There is growing evidence that the Russians continue to provide the Iranian regime with intelligence data. This is clearly destructive activity, and it must be stopped, as it only leads to further destabilization. All decent states are interested in guaranteeing security and not allowing more problems. Markets are already in the negative, and this significantly complicates the fuel situation in many countries. Therefore, the Russians, with their help to the Iranian regime to stay afloat and strike more accurately, are effectively prolonging the war. The reaction must be appropriate. The geopolitical landscape of West Asia is currently teetering on the edge of a catastrophic transformation. What began as regional skirmishes has now evolved into a high-stakes standoff involving global superpowers and their sophisticated military doctrines. The central point of contention remains the escalating friction between Iran and the Western alliance, primarily led by the United States. However, the internal dynamics of this alliance are showing visible signs of strain as key European partners, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, explicitly distance themselves from any offensive military maneuvers that could ignite a full-scale regional war. The United Kingdom's stance, articulated by Prime Minister Keir Starmer, emphasizes a defensive-only posture. This is a significant shift in rhetoric, signaling that while the UK is prepared to intercept Iranian missiles and protect its regional bases under the umbrella of collective self-defense, it will not be a party to preemptive strikes. This distinction between defense and offense is crucial. It serves as a diplomatic safeguard to prevent British forces from being dragged into a protracted conflict that lacks a clear legal basis or a viable long-term exit strategy. By focusing on the protection of commercial shipping and the neutralization of incoming threats, the UK is attempting to balance its alliance commitments with its domestic and international legal obligations. Simultaneously, French President Emmanuel Macron has introduced a narrative of universalism and sovereignty. France's refusal to support an escalation is rooted in the belief that the territorial integrity of nations like Lebanon must be respected. Macron's warning is clear. Invasion and occupation are not sustainable paths to security. By referencing the struggles in the West Bank and Lebanon, France is highlighting the humanitarian and legal costs of military expansionism. This position reflects a broader European fear that a war with Iran would not only destabilize the Middle East, but also trigger a massive refugee crisis and economic collapse across the Mediterranean. Germany, under Chancellor Friedrich Merz, is playing the role of a diplomatic mediator. Merz's recent communication with Donald Trump underscores the urgency of delaying kinetic action. The 5-day postponement of strikes on Iranian infrastructure provides a narrow but vital window for direct diplomacy. Germany's concern over Iranian power plants and nuclear sites is shared by Russia. The Kremlin has been vocal about the irreversible consequences of targeting nuclear facilities, warning that such actions would cross a global red line, potentially leading to environmental disasters and an uncontainable military response. Amidst these diplomatic maneuvers, the role of Russia is becoming increasingly controversial. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has raised alarms regarding Russia's intelligence sharing with the Iranian regime. According to Zelensky, Russian support is not just diplomatic but technical, providing Iran with the data necessary to refine its drone and missile strikes. This collaboration represents a destructive activity that complicates the global fuel market and prolongs the duration of the conflict. The integration of Russian intelligence with Iranian military capabilities creates a formidable challenge for Western naval forces operating in the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz itself has become a primary theater of economic warfare. EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen's condemnation of Iran's de facto closure of the strait highlights the vulnerability of global trade. With the laying of mines and the targeting of unarmed commercial vessels, Iran is exerting pressure on the global energy supply. The freedom of navigation is not just a legal principle, it is the lifeblood of the global economy. As oil and gas installations come under threat, market volatility increases, leading to a negative trend in global financial sectors. The international community is now faced with a choice: pursue a diplomatic settlement that addresses Iran's maritime aggression, or risk a total shutdown of one of the world's most critical shipping lanes. The endgame of this conflict remains shrouded in uncertainty. While the US and its allies contemplate their next moves, the internal push for a political and diplomatic settlement is growing louder. The consensus among European leaders is that military force should be a last resort, especially when the risks include nuclear escalation and global economic recession. The next few days will be decisive. If the direct contacts facilitated by Germany and the diplomatic warnings from Russia and France fail to produce a ceasefire or a cooling-off period, the world may witness the beginning of a conflict that no nation, allied or otherwise, is truly prepared to finish. The balance of power in West Asia is no longer just a regional issue. It is a global crisis requiring a unified yet cautious international response.